everyone, and welcome to our first ever video recording of Conversations with CAB Counselor. So I am your host, Kayla Nieves. Nice to finally put a face with a name. And here with me, I have our lovely co-host, Kirsten.
Hello, everyone.
So today's episode, we are going to talk about the changes that were made to credentialing assistance. So in our previous episode, we talked about all the new changes that were made to tuition assistance. So this one is going to be about all the changes made to credentialing assistance from 11 December. So some of those changes, well, actually I'm just going to go through all the changes that were made. So one of the big ones was that previously soldiers were getting $4,000 a fiscal year, which we know was increased to $4,500 per fiscal year. But before 11 December, they could use all $4,000 that they had towards credentialing assistance if they so choose to. Now with the new change, while the pot of money was increased to $4,500, the amount of money that could be used towards credentialing assistance was actually lowered. So now service members are only allowed to use $2,000 per fiscal year towards credentialing assistance. Even if you have other funding on your account and you don't intend on using it for tuition assistance, you are still capped at the $2,000 per fiscal year. So that's one of the changes that was made. Another change that was made is now soldiers are limited to only pursuing 3 credentials for every 10 years of service. Okay, so I want to repeat that. For every 10 years of service, you are only allowed to pursue 3 credentials. And with that change also came a change that now you are only allowed to pursue 1 credential per fiscal year. Previously, if you completed a credential in 3 months and you still had time left in the fiscal year to submit funding requests for another credential, you could do that. Now, the Army is now saying you are now only allowed to pursue 1 credential per fiscal year. So if you've already completed a credential for this fiscal year, you now have to wait until October 1st of next fiscal year, so October 1st of this year, to pursue another credential. Right. And then one of the final changes that was made is now service members are only allowed to put $1,000 of their funding for credentialing assistance towards aviation credentials. So those were the big changes that were made with this first wave of changes as of 11 December. But I feel like even though we're talking about credentialing assistance and we're just saying credentialing assistance, I feel like some of our listeners probably don't actually know what credentialing assistance is, and more specifically what a credential is, because I see it all the time in my counseling sessions. Soldiers come in and say, I want to pursue a certificate, I want to get a certificate, and sometimes when I hear certificate, I think academic certificate, but in reality, they're talking about a credential. And when I say, do you want to do a credential, they think I'm talking about a certificate. So I feel like it's very important that we differentiate the two so that our listeners understand what a credential is, how it applies, and then what a certificate is and how that could apply to their education and also their careers.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to mention is that credentialing assistance and tuition assistance are designed to cover 2 separate things. So tuition assistance is designed to pay for classes that will help propel you towards a college degree. Credentialing assistance offers funding for training and books and materials designed to help prepare you for a credentialing exam, as well as the credentialing exam itself. So then when we break that down into what a credentialing exam is and how that differs from an academic certificate, a credentialing exam is something that once you take that exam, you have proof that you are credentialed in that area to do a specific job. And that credential can be used on its own, or it can be used to build on top of something that you may already have. So for example, some soldiers will come to our office and say they want to become a welder. You don't necessarily need a college degree to become a welder, but you do need that credential saying that you are qualified to work in that field. So credentialing assistance can pay for the training that you need to become a welder, any books or materials you need to purchase to prepare to become a welder, and it can pay for the actual exam itself. So when you're all done and you pass that exam, you can take that to a civilian employer and say, I can work as a welder. Credentials are also used to build on top of what you already have. So let's say, for example, you want to get into HR. You're going to need a bachelor's degree to work in that field. So you finish your bachelor's degree, But then they tell you we also need these credentials in certain areas to show that you are fully proficient in this field. So you use your CA to pay for some of those credentialing exams that you then use to make yourself more marketable when you're applying for civilian jobs. So when you think of credentials, think of an exam. There's an exam that goes along with those credentials. An academic certificate is a little bit different because there doesn't necessarily have to be an exam that comes at the end of that certificate. And that academic certificate is really just being used to enhance your knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I always use this example with soldiers that come in my office. I have my master's degree in counseling, so I have everything that I need to work as a counselor. But let's say tomorrow I decide that I want to work in drug and alcohol rehabilitation counseling. I have my counseling degree, but I don't really have the knowledge or skills with that specific population. So it would benefit me to enroll in an academic certificate to heighten what I already know. There's not going to be an exam at the end of that certificate. It's just going to help me and make me more marketable. There may be also some cases where, let's say I want to work in childcare. I may not need a degree. I may not need anything more than a high school diploma. But there's an academic certificate that I might be able to enroll in that can make me better at that career. So again, main difference between the two: credential, there's always going to be an exam at the end. Academic certificate, there may not be an exam at the end. There may be an exam that you can take, but it doesn't always correlate. So then one other thing that we wanted to mention before we go into some very specific Q&As are, why did the Army make these changes? And the Army made these changes because CA is such a successful program. So many soldiers were taking advantage of their CA, but the cost of the program was just exceeding the fiscal year authorization. So the Army determined that if they really want to keep this program available for soldiers and keep it sustainable, they had to make cuts, and these were some of the cuts that they decided to make.
All right, so we've kind of talked about the changes that were made as of 11 December. We've talked about what a credential is versus an academic certificate. And we talked about the why the Army made all these changes so that we can keep credentialing assistants around. So I want to dive into some questions just about the changes in credentialing assistants to help clarify any confusion that might be out there for those who have been using credentialing assistance this entire time, but also for those of you who are interested in credentialing assistance and you're not really sure if it's something for you or if it's something that's available to you, which it is. But we understand that doing something new and unheard of can be scary. And so we are making this episode just so that everyone is going to have some sort of peace of mind and also know that we're still here for you. So even if after this episode you're still confused, you can still always come in and talk to one of us counselors, and we will try our hardest to get the answers to whatever questions you may have. But let's answer some questions now. So one of the biggest things that I figured would be a question for those of you who've already been pursuing credentialing assistance is, if you submitted a CA request for fiscal year 25 prior to the policy changes, that doesn't start until after the policy change and it exceeds the new policy change funding limits, will it be approved? So basically what that question is saying is, if a soldier submitted a CA request prior to 11 December, so 10 December, and that funding request was for $4,000, but this new policy change came out and said fiscal year limits for funding requests are now capped at $2,000, will their request get approved?
And the answer to that is yes. So CA requests submitted prior to the policy change will be approved under the terms of conditions of CA that existed at the time of submission, and they will be subject to the prior policy funding limit of $4,000. So all that's to say is, if you submitted a CA request on 10 December for a training that was $4,000, it will get approved. This change only goes into effect for CA requests made after 11 December.
Okay.
So then another question that we are assuming our listeners may have, visitors too, come visit us at the Education Center.
Come on.
So how many credentials can I get from this point forward?
So moving forward, you can get 3 credentials for every 10 years of service, right? Now, the new limit is a change from the previous policy that didn't limit the amount of credentials based on service time. But with the new policy change, you only get 3 for every 10 years. So I feel a big thing that we should point out right now is that if you have only been in for 8 years and you've already completed 7 or 8 credentials, you are pretty much capped at your credentialing assistance until you hit the 20-year mark, right?
Yes.
So until you hit 20 years, you can no longer pursue any credentials because you've already exceeded the 3 per 10 year limit. Now, if you are at the 8 year mark and you've only completed, let's say, 4 credentials, when you hit that 10 year mark and you re enlist, you will then be able to pursue those other 2 credentials for a total of 6 credentials for those 2 10 year terms of service that you're going to serve. I feel like that's really confusing and it kind of makes sense to us, and I'm trying to say it in a way that'll make sense to you all too. Not gonna lie, it definitely took me a couple times reading this to understand it. We are human. But just on your Army Ignited account, if you log in on your dashboard, it will tell you in the top of your screen towards the right side exactly how many credentials you have left that you can pursue. It'll say 0 out of 3 or 0 out of 6 or 8 out of 6, whatever the case may be. As long as that number on the top is lower than a number on the bottom, I feel like I'm going back to my BSEP days. But as long as the number on the top is lower than the number on the bottom, you can still pursue credentials. It's when that number at the top either matches the number on the bottom or exceeds the number on the bottom that you are now pretty much frozen when it comes to pursuing credentialing assistance. If your number is 6 at the bottom and you want to pursue more credentials, you are going to have to serve at least 20 years before you can do that, especially if you've already completed 6 credentials using credentialing assistance, okay? So just something to keep in mind. So must a soldier complete mil gears prior to using CA if they've already used CA previously? I feel like we kind of should discuss what mil gears is since it's now a requirement.
Yep, and this is one of the things I think we actually skipped as one of the new requirements soldiers have and one of the new rules that you have to follow in order to use CA. So kind of like we talked about with tuition assistance, where soldiers using TA for the first time have to complete the Career Path Decide assessment tool. Soldiers using credentialing assistance for the first time now also have to use their own assessment tool, which is called mil gears.
Yep.
So you only have to complete it once. You only have to complete it the first time you plan on using CA, but it is another tool that's designed to really help you figure out what direction you want to take, what you want to do, where you want to go. And that will help you figure out what credentials you should be pursuing, especially now since you're limited to how many credentials you can pursue throughout your military career.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to point out with mil gears, because I've actually been able to see it, is it does require you to upload your JSTs, your joint service transcripts, or your ERB or your ORB, and it's taking that information from that document, reading it, and then also suggesting what credentials you should pursue. It also asks you to upload your civilian education, so if you have any degrees or if you speak any foreign languages, it actually asks for all that information. It creates this document that lists all that out. But in the mil gear system itself, it actually allows you to compare different credentials that might be a benefit to you for the Army or for your education based on what you have, and you can compare them to see which one you should pursue first or next. So it's a great tool. Definitely should use it even if you've already used credentialing assistance before. Even though it's not a requirement for you to use it now, you can still always go on your Army Ignited account and try out mil gears for yourself and see what it says for you.
So another question that we've been asked so far is, do recertifications count towards the lifetime limit?
So no, recertifications do not count towards the lifetime limit, but it will subtract from your fiscal year funding limit. So you can recertify as many credentials as you need to. Just understand it's coming out of that $2,000 that you get per fiscal year. So as long as you have funding for your recertifications, you can use your credentialing assistance for that and also pursue a new credential at the same time.
So then just to confirm, could I recertify 2 credentials in the same fiscal year?
As long as you have the money for it, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, awesome.
All right. So if I feel like I've kind of talked about this, but I've already obtained 3 credentials with CA, but I've only been it for 8 years. Again, once you hit that 10-year mark, you re-enlist, or if you hit the 10-year mark and it's part of your contract, your Army Ignited account will update to where you can now pursue another 3 credentials. All right. So with great changes, or with great things come great responsibility, another change that I did forget to talk about is that now if you pursue a credential, you have to take the exam.
Yes.
And I believe they have a year to take the exam.
Yep.
Or they'll be recouped for the training.
Yep.
So I think part of the problem, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that there were so many soldiers pursuing all these credentials and having all these different ed goals for the credentials, and they're doing the trainings and they're passing the trainings, but then they're not going the step further to take the exam portion and complete the entire ed goal and basically become certified.
Yep.
So another change that was made was that now if you submit an ed goal and then you do the training for that ed goal, you now also have to do the exam for the ed goal.
Yep.
Or you'll be recouped for whatever the cost of the training.
Yep.
So if a soldier fails the training for a credential but passes an exam, will they be recouped? So if they do the training, they fail the training, but then they request funding for the exam and they actually pass the exam, will they be recouped anything?
Yep. So if a soldier fails the training for a credential, they will be recouped for that training, regardless if they take the exam or not. So if you take the training and take the exam, but you fail the training, you will be recouped the cost of the training. If the exact opposite happens and you take the training, you pass the training, but you fail the exam, then you'll be recouped the cost of the exam. And if you fail both, or like Kayla mentioned, if you fail to actually take the exam, you'll be recouped the cost of the training in that course. And if you fail both, you'll be recouped the cost of the training and the exam. So really all of that is to say, when you are about to request credentialing assistance for the training, if that's what you need it for, and the exam, make sure that you're prepared. Make sure you have the time to devote to the training. Make sure you have the time and you've prepared for the exam. Because if you fail either or all, either or any or all or one or two, you will be recouped the cost. And we don't want soldiers paying things back if they don't have to.
Yeah.
So be prepared.
And a good thing about credentialing assistance is, yeah, you may be recouped if you fail the training, or you may be recouped if you fail, you will be recouped if you fail the training, and you will be recouped if you fail the exam. But I think the biggest part that we should talk about, or just briefly discuss, is you're going to be recouped if you don't take the exam.
Yeah.
And with credentialing assistance, unlike tuition assistance, you have, again, still 365 calendar days to complete that credential. So we understand life happens, things happen. You have to go on missions, you have to go on field ops, and TC is always around the corner. So give yourself that time and grace to complete that training, but also complete that exam. You can tell Army Ignited how much time you need, up to 365 calendar days to complete that credential. So take the time you need, because I would rather you have the time and not need it than need the time and not have it, and then you still end up being recouped because you didn't have the time to take this exam.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have 180 days from the time your training ends to request credentialing assistance for the exam. So even after you complete your training, you do still have time to prepare for that exam.
Exactly.
But like Kayla said, it just has to all be within a year time frame.
So take your time.
Yep.
But get it done.
Yep. Good advice.
Get her done. All right. So, I feel like we've kind of talked about the whole, if a soldier completes the training for a credential and decides not to pursue the exam, they're going to be recouped.
Yep.
So, if a soldier fails the training for a credential and is recouped, does that count towards their 3 per 10-year limit when it comes to credentials?
It does not. It's going to revert to the original number of credentials per 10 years.
Okay. So even if you do fail the exam, which we really hope you don't, but if you do, then that won't take away from your 3 per 10-year or 3 per 10-year limit. So which, I mean, if you fail it, it doesn't count towards your 3 per 10-year limit. If you pass it, then obviously, yes, it will count towards your goal or your 3 per 10-year limit. Try saying that 10 times faster. But if a soldier successfully completes training towards a goal but fails the exam, does that count towards their 3 per 10-year limit? So they complete the training, but they fail the exam. That's counting towards their 3 per 10-year limit.
Yes. So that one, once a soldier is recouped the funds for the exam, the number of credentials will remain the same since the goal is still being pursued and has a completed training against it. So if the soldier has remaining for fiscal year funding available, they can submit another CA request to attempt to pass the failed exam after the recoupment is processed.
So basically, the soldier passes the training, they take the exam the first time, they fail it.
Mm-hmm.
They can go on their Army Ignited account, select a recoupment option.
Yep.
But then they also have the ability now to go back and submit a funding request for that same exam.
Yep.
Again.
Yep.
To try to pass it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And only then will it count towards their 3 per 10-year limit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
So another question we have is, how long is a CA education goal good in Army Ignited?
Forever. I'm just kidding. So, CA created ED goals remain active as long as the training and the exam funds requested are obligated with the CA request towards the goal. So if the CA request has not been made associated with the ED goal within 90 days of creation, the ED goal is deleted. So if you create an education goal for your credentialing assistance request and you don't submit any funding requests within 90 days of making that goal, your ED goal will be deleted. Did I say that right? I feel like, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So your ED goal, if you submit a funding request, is open as long as you need until you complete that exam, but within 180 days of completing the training.
Exactly.
But if you submit an ED goal and you never submit any funding requests for either the training or the materials or the exam, it will remain on your account and open for 90 days, and then after that, it will be deleted.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if you submitted a CA request prior to December 11th, I feel like we kind of talked about it, for a training exam, and it starts after the policy changes, but it hasn't been approved yet, is it subject to the new policy limits or the previous policy? So because we know with credentialing assistance, it takes a minimum of 45 days for your funding request to get approved and paid out to your vendor. So if they submitted a funding request prior to 11 December and it was for, I don't know, $3,500, will it be approved or will it be rejected and they have to submit a new funding request within the $2,000 fiscal year limit?
Yeah. So training and exam CA requests submitted prior to December 11th with start dates after the policy changed will be grandfathered. However, if the cost of that CA request meets or exceeds the new annual funding limit, which is $2,000 placed on or after December 11th, no other fiscal year CA requests will be approved and paid. So all that's to say, kind of like our initial example, if you submitted a CA request on 10 December for a training and exam that costs $3,000, you'll be grandfathered. You'll be able to use your $3,000 towards that training and that exam, but you will not be able to submit any other CA requests for that fiscal year.
Okay.
So I'll ask this next question. So where can we find a list? So we've talked a little bit about how aviation credentials are limited now to $1,000. And that's been the case for all active duty for a couple of years now, but that's also the case for any National Guard or Reserve listeners as well. Now you are also limited to $1,000 per aviation credential. So where can we find a list of aviation credentials that are limited to $1,000?
So when you begin the process submitting your CA request, each aviation credential that is limited to $1,000 will have a note indicating it when you select it. So when you go into your Army Ignited account and you begin that funding request, for that aviation credential, it will say, I believe in little red letters, that it is limited to $1,000 for that request. Okay. Were there any other questions that we want to go through? I think that was it.
Yep, so we've kind of touched on all of the FAQs that we were submitted, and these are important because these are all questions that we as counselors had.
Yes.
So we know that our listeners are probably going to have very similar questions.
If not more.
If not more. And so if you do have more questions or questions about anything that we discussed, please come see an education counselor, or the subject matter experts for credentialing assistance can also be reached virtually. Through the Army Cool website, you can schedule an appointment to meet with a CA counselor. There is also now a requirement once you complete mill gears, in order to get your education goal approved, you'll actually have to receive a training from a CA counselor. We have yet to see what that training looks like exactly, but it is a new requirement, again, only for those first-time CA users. So you'll use mill gears, you'll complete that mill gears assessment, you'll complete your training from a CA counselor, then you can get your education goal approved, saying this is the credential that I want to pursue, and that's when you can start to submit your CA requests against that education goal.
Yes. So all the changes that we discussed are part of what they are calling Wave 1 of policy changes. So with that being said, there is a Wave 2 of policy changes that are coming out. We don't have an exact date of when these changes will come into effect, but these are some changes that we feel and we've been given permission to discuss. So with that being said, I'm just going to put it out there. So whenever Wave 2 comes into effect, and all of these changes will be updated in AR 621-5. One change is soldiers will be required to obtain command approval prior to using tuition assistance and credentialing assistance. Another change, soldiers with 2 recoupments between tuition assistance and credentialing assistance combined in the same fiscal year will be suspended for 12 months. So soldiers with 2 recoupments in the same fiscal year, you'll be suspended from using TA and CA for 12 months. And finally, commissioned officers will be excluded from using CA. Enlisted soldiers and warrant officers will remain eligible. So again, we don't have a set date of when Wave 2 changes will come into effect, but these are just things to note.
We also wanted to mention that we know that some of these changes may seem a little bit scary, but we have services and resources at the Education Center to make some of these changes a little bit less scary. So when it comes to having unit command approval before you can request TA, we have a really amazing unit outreach program, and we can send an assigned unit guidance counselor out to your unit to speak about how you do that. So there's no confusion, no TA requests are getting delayed. So we can come directly to your unit and show commanders how to approve those TA requests. We can also talk, and we will talk in future podcast episodes, about all kinds of different credentialing opportunities that soldiers have if CA is no longer available to you as well. Workforce Solutions of Central Texas has a couple of really great grants where they can help pay for some credentials. Onward to Opportunity can help pay for credentials. So there's lots of other options. And we're also here to provide support to ensure that soldiers aren't failing classes or aren't being recouped. So we've got a lot of resources to make sure that these changes run smoothly whenever they are finally released.
Also, Phantom Signal Academy.
Yep.
We will be discussing them in the future. They are here in the Education Center, but we do know that they offer credentials as well. And just be on the lookout for our future episodes where we will discuss credentialing assistance a little more, but also like how to fund credentialing once either you're at your fiscal year limit or you're at your 3 per 10-year limit. You really gotta get used to saying that.
We're working on it.
Promise. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
I think the big thing is just continue to listen, continue to follow our social media pages. We will make sure that you always have the most up-to-date information. And feel free to reach out if you have questions. You know, you saw that this is new to Kayla and I. Sometimes we get tripped up on our words. Sometimes we get confused by the policy, so we don't expect you all to be experts. That's what we're here for, to help you. So take advantage, come visit.
And if you do nothing else, just ask. Just
Yes.
ask us. We love when you come ask us questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode and watching
Yes!
an episode of Conversations
Yes.
with CAV Counselors. You all enjoy the rest of your day. And cut.
That one was much better.
I like when I can't see
Yes,
myself.
same.
Let me stop the recording.